case, but we are moving on with the America's Army game from the Department of Defense. And Colonel Wardinsky, is that correct, sir? And Frank Blackwell. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thanks, sir. Well, good afternoon. I'm Casey Wardinsky. This is Frank Blackwell. And over there is the man who gets all the blame if something goes wrong. That's Brett Wilson. And the three of us comprise the team of government officials that run this project. So when you think America's Army, they're not all there with us doing this.
We're an army of three.
Yeah.
You travel, you go in light, right?
The America's Army game was born very much in the spirit of grassroots efforts to use the internet to provide, and other technologies to provide transparency over our governmental processes. Now, in my part of the government, what we've tried to do in the world of recruitment is to use online game technology to create something that had never existed before, and that's a trial size experience. You can test drive a car, we can send you some detergent, but understanding what it is to be a soldier is a very complex thing and very foreign from most people's experiences. And by doing this, what we hope to do, much in the case of the grassroots efforts, was to broaden and deepen the understanding of what it is to be a soldier and what it is to be in the U.S. Army. And by doing that, to also add this idea of soldiering to the set of things young adults consider doing as they mature. Well, unfortunately for us, this idea of a game and using it to broaden came up about 200 years after the Army got going, and a lot of rules had already been written. So along the way, we either had to rewrite some rules or to do a lot of innovating to make the big innovation work. And those littler innovations included everything from the idea of protecting U.S. government property, and we needed to do that. The Army normally doesn't copyright or patent things, but we had to because the hackers are our nemesis. And we couldn't enforce the Millennium Online Protection Act if we didn't own it. To the other extreme of using online communities as our friends to develop a community of interest in the Army. So how'd we do? Well, I'd like to give you two sort of different perspectives on how America's Army is working in this business as a trial size experience. The first is the one that keeps me going. The time is spring 2003. The place is Newark, New Jersey. We're in a garage, and we're with a young guy playing around with some golf clubs. And he's got a graphite shaft, and that darn thing breaks. And a piece goes in his arm and severs his artery. And he starts to bleed out, and Mom doesn't know what to do. And she calls for son number 2, and son number 2 comes out of the house, goes over to son number 1, stops the bleeding, stabilizes him until the ambulance gets there. Doctors say later he would have bled out if that hadn't happened. Well, how'd that happen? Well, son number 2 had been playing America's Army. And about this point in time, we had really beefed up the medic content in our game because America's at war. And beyond broadening an understanding of the Army and soldiering, we can broaden on other scores. This is essentially an economy of scale effort where it costs us almost nothing to do public goods sort of efforts. And our public good was, hey, there's a lot of medicine in the Army, that's something you can do, but oh, by the way, we can teach you how to be a first responder. And so Mom called us and said, thanks for making my son a first responder. On the other side of the coin is, we've got 7 million players playing our game. Tonight, there'll be 120,000 hours of gameplay where kids explore the Army and what it is to be a soldier. Over the years, they've spent 160 million hours doing that. Because of that, now, when recruits show up at a basic training site, 40% of them have already done things that they will do in basic training. They've played through basic training in our game. They know what it is to get yelled at by a drill sergeant. They know what the obstacle course looks like. And they've done all that mental rehearsal to dominate those events. And so America's Army is doing what we think it was designed to do. It's putting the Army in that decision space and giving those kids that depth of understanding. Now, Frank is going to talk to you about the extensions, those transmitted goods to other applications.
And let me give you an example. Let's take a local sheriff in North Georgia who, through Homeland Defense, gets a handheld chemical agent detector, but no way to train it. We can use America's Army. He can download it over the web at no cost and train immersive, engaged, and decision-making training. This is shared with other agencies, and this is just one example of where we've already repurposed the America's Army game for training application. We have fielded chem biodetection, convoy operations, as well as cultural awareness. We're also working with civil affairs, personnel recovery, and medical training. We have partnerships now ongoing with NASA to develop a NASA game to inspire young scientists and engineers. We're also working with the Secret Service to develop training applications. We're just beginning to scratch the surface of the potential of reusing America's Army for training and education.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Yes, Ron Kirk.
If I could start, Colonel, if I might, I think it's a fabulous project, and I told you I applaud you for taking on the infrastructure within and without the Army to bring this to life. But one of the issues we were trying to get our arms around and looking at the data and information you provided us is just how much this has sort of penetrated your ability to recruit and trying to tell whether it was making some difference. Now, you referenced that 40% of your recruits that show up now for basic training have been exposed to the game. Can you help us understand a little bit more now how you are tracking the game usage versus what it means to, in terms of those recruits that show up and sign up to be in the Army?
Yes, sir. America's Army is really the very front door of the Army now. It's this piece of the internet where you can get to it and you can explore it. Well, what we're really after is for them to learn about us as an organization. But in order for them to do that in a way that they feel is safe, we don't learn about them as individuals. We learn about them in aggregate. So I can tell you how many people have played, and when we survey them, we can tell you how many have arrived at basic training that played. But if I was to ask Billy about his gameplay and his aptitude or propensity to join the Army, I would be digging into privacy aspects that we've forsworn. We want them to learn about us, and as they go through the recruiting process, we learn about them. This is just the first step in a process that begins with deeper research on a site like GoArmy.com, a discussion with a recruiter. And really what we're doing here is when we got going with this volunteer Army, about 30% of the labor force had been in the military. And they could be that vicarious point of contact, an uncle, a coach, whoever, to talk about the military. Well, today it's 10%. So we're trying to use the virtual as that point of contact to provide that context, that information about being a soldier that causes that curiosity to arise to take the next step. And as that deeper relationship emerges, then we begin to learn about them. But the privacy aspect of this is critical. Otherwise, we'd breach the trust that would cause them to download our 800 megabytes of software, and we just think that the effort would fail. So we do things like surveying at entry to recruiting, to the basic training, and efforts like that to see is this feeding through. And we also talk to recruiters about, is there a feed through at their level? Does a kid play this have a better understanding of what he's talking to when he talks to a recruiter? Yes.
Do you have any measurement of actually how many recruits have come as a result of this? What percentage of your recruiting it is?
There was
about 80,000 a year?
The Army is recruiting this year about 80,000 soldiers.
Right.
And that level of effort costs us about $1.5 billion, and we invest 9,000 sergeants to do it, and they get about one recruit a month. The Army game is about 1/2 of that effort. And in order to cover the cost of developing and running the Army game, we'd need to get about 100 recruits. We estimate that kids who directly came in the Army, who tell us, I was inspired to join the Army because of this game, that we're getting 16 times that number.
So I still don't tell me 16 times.
16 times the
what?
100. So we're getting about 1,600 kids who say, the reason I'm here is that game."
1,600 how often?
Every year.
Out of the 80,000, 1,600 come out of this?
And so that's above and beyond this purpose of broadening the understanding and deepening.
It's less than 5%.
It's 4%.
Okay.
The cost of the game is about a 1% level. So I'm sorry, the cost of the game is about 100 people. We're getting 1,600.
Great. Thank you, Ed.
We've talked about this earlier, and I have the sense that this innovation was not enthusiastically received throughout the Army. Can you tell us how you managed to sell it? And what the sources of resistance were?
Sure. The selling of it was really straightforward. I work for 3- and 4-star level leaders, and they immediately got it. They knew the Army faced a very severe problem in this communication enterprise. TiVo, our commercials are being screened out. TV, we used to advertise on 3 channels. Now you have to be on about 300 between satellite radio and TV. Our message just isn't getting through, and the cost is on the order of 100 times higher than the America's Army's method. So they were looking for new ways of connecting, and they knew kids were spending their time on the internet to do research, communicate, and entertainment. So they bought it immediately, and they understood it. The sergeants got it. The mid-levels, this wasn't something they were used to, and there wasn't any rules written about doing this. And if there's no rules, the answer is one of two things. You can't do it, or you have to change it to fit within inside the existing parameters. And if you try and change it, you're essentially taking it back in time. So what we had to do was work through the lawyers, who were the most resistant, and some of the internet security people. In fact, today, my time's up?
No, you take a little more time.
In fact, today, if I was to try and demo this game on my laptop, I'd be breaking a regulation because you're not allowed to run games on Army laptops. Last week, we finally got them to let us run games on the Army's network. So we're working through it, and it's just there were a lot of rules to work through.
Yeah. Can I ask just one last question? As an innovation to recruit, it sounds very attractive. When you start moving over toward the Army as being the educator for the country, or major educator for the country, there are those who will feel uncomfortable with the notion that we ought to ask the military to be the educators. Why not give the Department of Education a lot of money to invent games, to tell people how exciting it is to be teachers in urban schools? Or there are a lot of other things we could think about. How should we weigh that proposition?
Well, there's two ways to think about it, sir. The actual most valuable commodity in this effort now, from the communication perspective, is the audience. You just don't create one of these audiences. There's 1,200 games made in a year, and about 10% of them succeed. America's Army is the #5 game played online in the world.
But should that make us feel comfortable?
Yes, because what you do is you take that audience and you begin to bring in other things that the United States cares about. You can bring in things like safety. So we're putting fasten your seatbelt in our game, and if you don't, when you're in an accident in a Hummer, there's consequences. You can bring in things like different languages to begin to penetrate into different audiences. You can do almost anything in this space if you've got the public's attention. And what keeps their attention is the entertainment component married up to a reward structure. That's the way I'd recommend. The other way to do it is, what we're doing also is we take what we've built and we share it. The government owns it. The United States owns it. So we can do for 10 cents on a dollar what it took us a year ago, $1 to do, because we own the trees, the buildings, the avatars, the network code. So when we build something for the Green Berets to teach them how to negotiate with a warlord, it costs them essentially 6 months of our time and about 1/100th of the cost of doing it the old way.
Let me just add to this. There are those, I happen to be a big fan of the Army. At the same time, we have a State Department which is totally underfunded. We have diplomats who are not given the kind of training, who do not have the kind of computers, and who are asked to, and you know, basically in many overseas countries, people from the Army are a heck of a lot more important than our diplomats. And they've got a lot more power, and they've got a lot more money at their disposal. And there are people who ask the question, is that a healthy trend? And you clearly believe that this, having the Army serve as a nation's educator, is a very healthy thing to do, seat belts and other things like that.
I think, no, I'm not comfortable with that, in fact. I'm comfortable of providing public goods where it's obviously a public good, like first aid training. I'm comfortable with sharing with the Secret Service if they want to put faces in our game that are the 10 most wanted from Al-Qaeda. But there's areas where you'd move out of our agency and into a different agency. But you can still share. You can share our expertise, you can share our web code, you can share our game code. And so the government owns this, the United States owns this, and the taxpayer shouldn't have to pay twice. And they shouldn't have to pay for the legacy way of doing business either. And the legacy practices, which are, you don't own anything when we're done. And if you want your sky to go from dark blue to light blue, it's $1 million because we own the code, Mr. Government, and you don't. Well, now the United States owns the property. And if they want to change something, they call us, and tomorrow's changed. And it's changed for the cost of changing it, which is one guy's salary. And I think this is the way business will be done in the future. And by chance, the Army just happens to be on the forefront of it.
Anyway, I just want to say, I'm sorry the audience didn't get to read your application because it was very clear how difficult this was to get through the Army. They smoothed over the challenges, I think. And if you ever really want to read an exotic tale.
I may have put pearls on the holiday.